So the question was, why does Hashem say please when he asks or tells Avraham to take his son Yitzchak and offer him as a sacrifice? And the Gemara told us the reason is because Hashem said to Avraham, if you don't pass this test, then everybody's going to say that the previous times that I tested you did not really have substance. And our question was, well, that's really not fair, because some of those tests were incredibly difficult. Some of them were things he did of his own accord, that he volunteered, like jumping into the furnace or being thrown into the furnace when he was a young man. That wasn't instructed by Hashem. And he was willing to sacrifice his own son. Surely that's a big deal. So if somebody is not able to step up to that plate of something which is such a massive challenge, how can you discredit everything else that he's done in his life and just say it's all worthless because you didn't do this extreme test? So last time we said, well, if we really want to understand this, we have to come back to the question of what is Mesiras Nefesh. And unfortunately, the typical line of thinking that we all have is we hear Mesiras Nefesh, we say, oh, that means self-sacrifice. And that's the most common translation of the term. Mesiras Nefesh is self-sacrifice. What does that really mean, self-sacrifice? So again, in most people's understanding, it means that if there is a challenge and that requires a person to be able to say, look, I'm even going to give up my life for what I believe, and they take that challenge and they're willing to give up their lives, that is Mesiras Nefesh. And the question is, Mesiras Nefesh is clearly a Jewish value. And sacrificing a person's life for their beliefs is a universal value. So what's the difference between Mesiras Nefesh, which is apparently what Abraham introduced into the Jewish equation, and the fact that right across the board, all kinds of people, even not in a religious context, are willing to risk things and even risk their lives for their beliefs? For example, you might find somebody as an environmental protester, or right? And what do? They risk their lives. They glue themselves to the road, or they go out there to save the whales in these deep swells in the sea, or they fight against oil rigs and they're on these little boats, and they're literally risking their lives for their beliefs. Besides the obvious, right? Which is that right across history, in all kinds of religious spheres, there were people who died for their beliefs. So what's so unique about the fact that we claim we've got this thing called Mesiras Nefesh, which is the highest level of dedication to Hashem, and it's unique, and it only really exists in the Jewish environment? Nonsense. Everybody, if they believe enough in their cause, is willing to risk things for their cause. So we've got to reframe the understanding of what Mesiras Nefesh is. That will help us to understand the story of the Akedah, where Avraham has to go take his son and offer him as a sacrifice. And that, in turn, will help solve the question of why, if he doesn't do this one, all the others look like they have no substance. So let's take it from this perspective. Why do you think people die for their beliefs?
Because they believe they're going to get a reward at the end of the day.
Exactly. So, for example...
I don't think everyone believes that.
No, but we don't, but most religions do.
So let's think about it for a second. There are many religions, and you might even argue that the same thing exists for many people in the understanding of Judaism, where they look at it like this. Life in this world is temporary. Life in this world is limited. So as long as a human being is in the physical form, of course you can do great things, and you can experience your religious beliefs, and you can practice them, and you can make a difference to the world, and maybe you can even proselytize and recruit other people to follow your religion as well. But nothing like what's going to happen when your soul goes into the next world, because there you're not locked into the physical experience, and you're going to be close to God. Depending on which particular theology you're connected with, that will determine what it means to be close to God. So for one, it's going to be that, you come to the other side and you get this big welcome where your deity kind of embraces you and gives you reward, and you sit in paradise. For another religion, maybe you're going to have this whole, harem of women, or whatever the case. But the fact is that there's some value, there's some benefit to being in the next world. And that benefit increases depending on how dedicated you were to your belief system in this world. So the highest level of dedication is to die for your beliefs, which means that you're going to get the greatest reward if you die for your beliefs. Now that is a sacrifice, but it's not an absolute sacrifice. It's no different, for example, to the person who says, in this period of my life, I'm going to sacrifice all the opportunities that I have to go out on holiday and travel the world and experience things because I'm putting that money away for one day in the future when I'm going to retire, and then I'm going to need something to be able to live on. So, yes, of course it's a sacrifice. It's not easy when you'd love to go down to the coast, but instead you put that money into an investment account. It's not easy, but it's not absolute sacrifice. In fact, it's just prudent. It's just self-interest. I'm looking at what's in it for me. Similar to what we learned last week, right? About the difference between the sachir and the and the shaliach. The person who's paid to do a job, in which case, if I'm paid to do a job, obviously the main thing that's interesting to me is me. What am I going to get out of the job? Whereas if I'm a shaliach, my main interest is what am I doing on behalf of the office that I represent or the individual who I trust, and therefore I'm doing something on their behalf, etc. So it's a similar kind of thing, right? When a person dies for their beliefs, it's very impressive to us because we question whether we die for our beliefs and think, wow, they must have been so committed, they must have been so dedicated, they must really be very advanced in their spiritual growth, etc., etc. Ultimately, the fact is they're still just thinking about themselves. I want to go through this process because the return on investment will make it worthwhile. So it's actually worth dying to be able to get that front row condominium in the next world. That's one of the drivers why people die for their beliefs. There's another possible reason why people die for their beliefs, and I think that this is the one that would speak to non-religious commitment as well. In other words, if a person has a religious belief, obviously they believe in an afterlife and they believe in the value of going through whatever pain in this world in order to gain that, whatever. But if there's somebody, let's say, who really believes that they have to be a climate change activist or that they have to stand up for the rights of a particular group of people, and they go and risk their lives. So, we've had throughout the course of history, we've got people who've gone and burnt themselves alive because of the particular belief system that they stand for, let's say, working for democracy in their country or whatever the case is. You can't tell me that that person is driven by a belief of what they're going to get in the next world because they may not believe in the next world. So what drives somebody like that to be willing to die for their beliefs?
Madness.
Could be. It is possible that people are not, mentally sound and therefore they have a death wish. That is possible. But there's another possibility as well. Well, why else would it be that somebody is willing to die for a belief that they have, even if that belief is not a religious belief?
Because they would possibly think that what they believe in will change if they give their life for it.
Yes, so they believe they're going to have an impact, right? So if I'm willing to die for this thing, I'm going to have an impact, which is a possibility. So they see a legacy to their very extreme decision and their very extreme behavior, and because they believe in the cause so deeply, it's worth it for some of us to die. That's similar to a soldier, right? So the soldier is not necessarily a religious person, but he goes to fight on the front because he believes in what he's defending and what his country stands for, or the need to get up against this particular threat. So even if he personally might die in the process, it would be worth it for the bigger picture. So again, it's a little bit less self-interested because now you're interested in the bigger picture. But at the end of the day, you obviously feel that the value of that bigger picture is that it will sustain something you believe in. So it's worthwhile for the investment so that the thing that you believe in is going to be able to continue, or the future for your children, or the future or the security of your family. Any of those motivations at the end of the day are self-interested. Like, I care about my family, I care about my country, I care about my ideology, and therefore I want to make sure that it is able to achieve its objectives or it's able to survive. Okay, that's another reason why a person might die for their beliefs. What else? There's one other option that we have to look at. Why else would a person die for their beliefs? So sometimes when people believe in something so strongly, and they see that it's not going to be possible to achieve what they believe in, they go into a psychological framework that says, it's not worth living anymore. If I can't achieve this particular goal, or if I can't live in this particular way, that's no longer called life. So rather kill me. And it's kind of on the edge of suicide, but well, I don't know. I wouldn't say necessarily that it's mushagas. So, for example, I'll tell you where you see that in a less extreme version and maybe a more relatable version is where a person, let's say, for example, has a devastating medical event in their life. So let's say, for argument's sake, God forbid, a person becomes a quadriplegic. They might say it's no longer worth living. So that's not meshuggah. That's because life, as they know it, and everything that they were able to do, and everything that they enjoyed about life, and everything that they felt gave them meaning, is no longer available to them. In which case, the person says, "Well, this is no longer called life."
But you're not allowed to do that.
That's a different question. We're not judging whether it's permitted or not. We're just judging what goes through people's minds. So it is likely that a person who really believes in something and really cares about something, when that's ripped away from them, is going to turn around and say, I don't call this living anymore. And so you may as well just kill, you may as well just take my life, because if I can't, if, for example, I believe that people should be able to live in a democratic country and now I'm living in a repressive regime, then it might be worth my while to stand in front of that row of tanks, because it's not worth living anymore. Or the person who is so dedicated to their spiritual beliefs, and then they live in a country that introduces laws that you can no longer live with your spiritual beliefs, that person's going to say, well, in that case, like, what's the point? What's the point of life? Now, that sounds very noble, and it shows a tremendous amount of dedication to Hashem, but at the end of the day, that is also self-interested. Because the fundamental basis is the person saying, my life is not going the way I wanted it to go, therefore I don't believe that my life is worthwhile anymore. It's still a self-orientation. So what we see right across the board is that it's very possible for people to have tremendous sacrifice for their beliefs, and yet the basis of that sacrifice is self-interest. Mesiras Nefesh is something absolutely different. What lies at the core of Mesiras Nefesh is a person saying, I'm irrelevant. It's not about me. I'm dedicated to Hashem. That's what's relevant. What's relevant is Hashem's interest. There's a story that at one particular time in the early 1900s, there was a kind of rule, a law on the table in Russia that was going to deeply, deeply impact Jewish education in Russia. And so there was a delegation of rabbis who went to try to petition the government, and they had some very strong arguments to try and neutralize this law, that it shouldn't go into effect, because it was going to have a very profound impact on Jewish education. So it was a high-level delegation, and one of the people who was part of that delegation was the Rebbe Rashab, who was the Rebbe at the time, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad. And there were various other illustrious sages who went along to petition and to present the case to the government. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. And so this was going to have a very strong impact. It was almost like the pre-communist impact on the Jew, or maybe it was already in the communist era. But the bottom line, it was a massive impact on Jewish education. And after the event, the Rebbe Rashab was crying. One of the other sages came over to him and said, why are you crying? We did our best. There's nothing more we could have done. We put ourselves on the line. We went to the government. It was a risky move. We made our argument. They rejected it. There's nothing else we can do. We don't control the things that we don't control. And the Rebbe Rashab said, yes, that's true, but the objective was not achieved. In other words, if I need to satisfy my conscience that I did everything that I had to do, then I've satisfied my conscience, and that's it. I can go home and say, as we often say, I tried my best. But that's not what counts. It's not about me. It's not about my conscience. It's not about fulfilling my role as a rabbi. It's about Hashem's objective for the world is that there should be Jews who are educated with Judaism. And that's now not going to happen. So that bothers me. I don't care about me. I care about Hashem. That's what Mesiras Nefesh is. Mesiras Nefesh is where a person repositions themselves in such a way where they say, this is not about me. This is not about if I'm going to get a portion in the world to come, or if my life has become intolerable, or whatever. This is about whatever Hashem expects of me, I'm just going to do it. In other words, the person who's living with Mesiras Nefesh doesn't think about what's it going to look like afterwards. Is it going to look like I'm getting this wonderful golden handshake in the world to come? Is it going to look like I protected the legacy of my beliefs and so therefore they're going to continue? None of that is relevant. Mesiras Nefesh is focused on only one thing. What does Hashem want of me? And then I'm going to do it. Which is fascinating, because that means that sometimes what Hashem wants from me is not very spiritual. And sometimes what Hashem wants from me is not very attractive. And sometimes what Hashem wants from me makes absolutely no sense to me. But all of those factors are irrelevant because I'm dedicated to what Hashem wants. And that's what happens at the Akedah. Because all the regular motivations for why people would do drastic things don't apply in the case of Akedah. For example, I really believe in my cause, and therefore I'm willing to take these tremendous risks and do all these things for my cause. That does not apply in the case of the Akedah, because the cause that Avraham cares about is all riding on Yitzchak. And if there's no Yitzchak, there will be no cause. And is Avraham 137 years old? There's no opportunity now to train somebody up from the ground and allow him to become the next replacement of Yitzchak. This is a do or die moment, not just for him in a personal capacity, but for everything that he cares about, for everything that he believes in. He's about to self-destruct. That's very different from the person who says, well, maybe if I do this, people will feel the commitment to the cause because they'll see how important it is. Bear in mind that when Avraham and Yitzchak go up onto this mountain, there are no witnesses. So it's not even a publicity stunt where you could say, well, wow, look at that. This man was obviously so dedicated to his cause. It must be really, really important. Let's find out more about it. Nobody's going to know about it. He comes back down from the mountain. Where's your son? Oh, no, God told me to sacrifice him. Yeah, right. You know, who believes that? How do I know he sacrificed? Maybe he ran away. Maybe he didn't like your belief system. Maybe he emigrated. I don't know. So he stands to lose everything that the cause is about. And in that context, to argue that, well, Avraham is going to get a really wonderful portion in the world to come is also nonsensical. Because what's the value of a portion in the world to come when you're going to be the only person there? Ever. Because nobody else is ever going to be part of this program. So if you really care about the value system and the program, dangling the carrot of the world to come is not attractive. Because I'm not living for the world to come. I'm living for the teachings of monotheism right across the world. And that's about to come to an abrupt halt.
Yitzchak must have agreed to this.
Yes, for sure.
So it must have been for both of them.
100%. The difference between Yitzchak and Avraham in this story is that Avraham had earlier occasions where he had shown dedication to Hashem. And so we're now testing all of those occasions based on how he behaves now. Whereas Yitzchak, this is his first occasion to show dedication to Hashem, so it doesn't necessarily tell us about his whole life and legacy. And that's what's really important over here. Now, this is what the Gemara is telling us. Hashem says to Avraham, he says, you need to get this right. Because if you don't, then, at least as far as everybody else is concerned, the optics are, as long as you had a self-interest in any of the other tests I gave you, you did those things. Because there was a value for you. And none of those things necessarily illustrate that you were dedicated to me. So, for example, when Nimrod says, if you don't bow to the idol, I'm going to throw you into the furnace. And Abraham says, throw me into the furnace. Maybe at that point, Abraham thinks being thrown into a furnace is a great thing because you're going to get this, tremendous accolade and reward in the next world. Or maybe Abraham is saying, I cannot live a life without my beliefs, so throw me in a furnace. We don't know that he's dedicated to Hashem and not to himself. Or when Hashem tells Abraham, leave everything that's familiar to you, your family, your birthplace, etc., and go to an undisclosed land. We don't know what's going through Abraham's mind. Maybe he's thinking, I'm sure Hashem has a plan, and I'm sure that plan is going to be valuable to me. So let me go on this journey because it's going to enhance my life. We don't know that it's out of absolute dedication to Hashem, because if it was you or I doing it, we might very well have been thinking, well, what's the return on investment over here? If you do what Hashem says, what are you going to get in response? And so on and so forth. For all of the 9, you can take each one of them individually and you can examine them, and it's very possible and very likely that we could translate into those episodes the possibility of self-interest. This is the first time where it's a ridiculous suggestion to think that Avraham had a self-interest. First of all, Avraham is the man of absolute kindness. He has illustrated that for over a century, that he'll do anything for anybody, even if they are the wicked people of Sodom and Amorah. He will open up a free hotel in the middle of the desert for people who he doesn't know. They come from a different background, different culture, different religious system, and he's going to invite them all into his home. Would you do that? Would you open your home to people who are, who knows what? You'd be like really suspicious. I don't know, this guy might come in and he might be anti-Semitic or whatever. And Avraham Avinu is this incredibly kind person, and now suddenly he's got to do something which is the antithesis of kindness. Put a knife to the neck of his son. That's dedication. There's no self-interest. Hey, let's try this. I've never tried what it's like to be a very harsh, aggressive person. It's obviously dedication to Hashem. The fact that there'd be no continuation to his legacy shows dedication to Hashem. The fact that he could have argued back and said, but hang on a second, Hashem, you promised me that Yitzchak would be the one to continue the legacy. So what happened to your promise? And he does not make that argument, shows you that this is complete dedication to Hashem, even when it makes no sense, even when he could argue it, even if he had a little bit of self-interest where he would have put something into the picture to slow this thing down. And that's why this is the story that gives us insight into every other aspect of Avram's life, that it was dedication to Hashem rather than balancing what's in the spiritual value system for me. Now, we read this every single day before we daven, the story of the Akedah. And we ask that question right at the beginning, how can we read the story of Avram and not the story of Rabbi Akiva or other great people? This is specifically the one that we read every single morning. And the reason for that is to remind ourselves that ever since Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are the only people in the whole of Jewish history who are called our forefathers, they're not called our great leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu, our great teachers, they're called our fathers. And the reason for that is because the relationship between a parent and a child is that you inherit qualities from your parents. It's in your genes. And that's what the Torah wants us to know, that Avram, not only did he do this for himself, but because of his incredible dedication to Hashem, we as his descendants have now inherited what you could call an Avraham spark that is inside of us, which means that when we do things out of dedication to Hashem, and they don't have to be at that extreme level of dying for the cause. It could be anything that we sacrifice for Hashem. For example, I cannot go to this particular place because the food's not kosher, or I cannot attend that particular sporting event because it's on a Shabbos, or the various other sacrifices that Jewish people have to make on a consistent basis. While externally, superficially, we could think, okay, the reason I'm doing this is because I believe in the cause and because I think I'm getting points, and those points will all accrue eventually to some beautiful portion of Gan Eden. This story illustrates to us that deep down at the core of who we are, what's actually driving us to do the things that are difficult to do for and in our Judaism, it's actually because we are deep down completely dedicated to Hashem, because that's our spiritual genetics. That's what we've inherited from Avraham, the ability to be totally dedicated to Hashem at all costs. And what's beautiful about it is that even when we're not conscious of that, and even when we think we're doing things for other ulterior motives, from our neshama's perspective, it's doing these things out of absolute dedication. And that's very profound and very beautiful. And obviously that means that at all times we're developing this very profound level of connection to Hashem through the things that we're doing, even when it looks like we're doing those things for other reasons.